Hey everybody, so today just want to share another tool if anyone's interested in this. So this is basically addressing one of the struggles with the LabVIEW native installer. So the LabVIEW native installer is great in that it automatically detects NI packages and software tools that are dependencies of your project. So for example, if you're using Visa, it's able to automatically detect that you're using Visa and include it in your installer. Same thing with like DAC-MX, iMac, different drivers, etc. So it does a really good job at automatically detecting all the NI stuff. And it does have a pretty simple way if you want to include something that's not required. For example, if I wanted to include the Excel NI TDMS importer, I can include that. If I want to include NI Max, if I want to include other components that maybe aren't necessarily required by my project, but I want to include them. It's really easy to do all of that through the installer that's part of your LabVIEW project. Where it really starts to become less advantageous is when you need to start including third-party installers with your installer. So LabVIEW, the installer, does have the ability to run an exe or a bash script after the fact, after being executed. So if you have one dependency, it's really easy to just call that installer after the fact, relatively simple. If you have multiple things you need to install with your LabVIEW program, so could be third-party tools that are or different drivers, etc., that need to be installed with your program. If you have more than one, you basically have no choice but to use bash scripts, which bash scripts aren't terribly hard, but you do have to take time writing the bash script to do all of that. And it would be really nice if you could just include those things in your installer so it all gets packaged together. There are tools like Advanced Installer that you can use that do have some capabilities for basically taking everything and packaging it together in a single installer. Advanced Installer isn't free though. And one of the other big downsides when working with LabVIEW is it no longer can automatically detect everything that you need to install with your LabVIEW program. So you now have to figure out what packages you need to include, or software components, driver components. It's obvious you're going to need the runtime engine always, but sometimes you don't maybe know. I'm using Visa. What other subcomponents are required with Visa? So it's a little tricky, and you got to know, how do I get this access to those components and whatnot. So this is basically a goal to kind of bridge that gap of being able to install dependencies with your LabVIEW installer. So basically this tool is meant to be included in your, basically built into an exe of its own, and you want to include this exe with your installer and set this exe to run after your installer finishes. And this way you can go and you can map a whole bunch of different things to install and include. And after your LabVIEW installer runs, the one that's built with the LabVIEW application builder, it can execute this exe, which will basically manage everything else for you. So you can go and run different EXEs and MSIs and whatnot. And this is all config based, so you can basically just need to include with your installer this exe and also the config file to execute. So we can look a little bit at what's happening here. So not necessarily a full blown program. It's meant to just be a run and done type thing. So we've just looking relative to where this is put. So you can put this LabVIEW Dependency Installer exe wherever you want. You can hide it from everyone if you wanted to. And we're just going to take this relative path and look for a LabVIEW install.json file. We're going to read the contents of that, which basically is just these objects, right? So you're going to have a path to an installer, which you can either have that in a location that's accessible to wherever this is being installed, or your installer can transfer those other installers over for you. I have this little flag here for whether this is an MSI or not, which if it is an MSI, it just has to be treated a little differently. And then there's also this options field. So you can run the installer with different options. So for example, if I want things to run silently, I just need to look up the options for that specific installer to make it run silently, and I can include those options here. So that way I can have everything run silently. So it's going to basically just read all that from JSON. It's going to set up my little loading bar, and then it's just going to go iterate through all of those. So if this is just a exe, whether it's like a self-extracting exe or an install exe or whatever it is, basically just going to build up this string, which is the installer path, and whatever options I've included, or no options if there are no options. Then I'm going to just pass that into the system exec and have it wait till it's done. And it's going to just collect the some information. So it basically creates a log file every time this is run. So if you're not sure what happened, you can go try to retrieve some information about what might have gone wrong in your installer. But basically we're recording the time that this installation took place, the name of the installer that was run, the path to the installer, what the standard output was, what the standard error was, what the return code was, or an error thrown by the system exec itself. And it's basically just going to iterate through this over and over again for however many things you've included. And when it's done, it's going to dump all those to a JSON file. So if you want, you can go look up what happened in your installer if something went wrong. If you have an MSI, it's just a little different. We're calling MSI exec, and then setting the working directory to your installer path instead. And yeah, that's pretty much it. You can just run this guy. It'll do its thing, run whatever installations are necessary, and record the results, and then shut down. So like I mentioned, this is just meant to be included as an exe with the config file in your installer. So you can use the LabVIEW built installer, but still be able to simply include third-party dependencies without having to go through writing batch files, especially when your batch files are different. You got to look up all the commands and all the different ways to do everything, and it can be a little tedious. So the goal here is this way I can just create a config file with a few different options. There is also this install builder, which is a separate GUI where I can basically go and select all of these items and then just click create file, and it will create the JSON config file for me. So you don't have to write the JSON file yourself. You can just use this GUI, and you can explore the file directory, add your options, and when you're done, just click create file, and that's going to create your JSON file that this will then use to run the installation. But yeah, that's pretty much it. If anyone is interested in this tool, it's free, open source. The link to this repository is in the description of the video. If you want to clone it or download it, use it however you want. Yeah, it's available for anyone. So yeah, thank you guys for tuning in.
Canon Controls is your gateway to mastering LabVIEW. Dive into programming for data acquisition, industrial communications, and manufacturing automation. Explore how to enhance your projects with cybersecurity best practices. Join the journey to elevate your skills and secure your systems with every episode.